We'll have to see whether the US government releases the photos of the dead bin Laden, but I just want to go over some of the reasons that have been given for not releasing the images of bin Laden. So the first reason given is that the images are simply too gruesome to display. Now, I find it hard to believe that the US government would be so concerned about the sensibilities of the public as to not release them on those grounds. You know, the government has released images of dead bodies before, for example, Saddam Hussein's sons. Now, true, they weren't particularly gruesome, but by all accounts, the images of bin Laden are gruesome because he has an open head wound in them. So at the very least, the government could release the images, but with this open head wound censored. So I'm not buying this excuse. You know, there was little concern shown when fake images of bin Laden did the rounds immediately upon his supposed killing, and those images were picked up by the mainstream media, and anyone with an internet connection could have seen them. So I say there's no real justifiable reason for not releasing the images on the grounds that they are too gruesome. Now, a reason cited by Michael Chertoff during BBC Two's Newsnight programme last night was that the images shouldn't be released because bin Laden is actually unidentifiable in them because of the injuries that were inflicted upon him. But we really need to see those images so we can decide for ourselves whether that's true. If bin Laden suffered a gunshot wound to the head, you know, there's a good chance that his face is still visually recognizable, but there's simply no way that we can know that without seeing those images, so that's not a valid reason for not releasing them. A third and key reason for the government not releasing the images of bin Laden has been given as the fact that people who currently disbelieve the supposed DNA evidence that the government has are not going to be convinced by the release of an image of bin Laden's dead body. We have the evidence, but if we release it, some people won't believe it anyway. This is an example of circular reasoning. This argument assumes that the people who are asking for evidence, when presented with the evidence, won't believe it, when that's simply not the case. Some people who currently are asking for evidence of bin Laden's death will be persuaded by the images of his dead body. Not everybody who is asking for the evidence will disbelieve the photos of bin Laden's dead body. So this argument is completely fallacious, and it's not a justifiable reason for withholding the images of bin Laden. No doubt there are some people who will disbelieve the images of bin Laden if they are released, and no doubt there are many people who don't even need to see the images of the dead bin Laden to believe the government's story of his supposed killing. But neither of these facts is sufficient to justify the withholding of those images. They need to be released. A fourth reason given for the withholding of the images is that their release would inflame the Muslim world and provoke Osama bin Laden sympathizers into committing retaliatory strikes against the West. This argument doesn't really stand up. As mentioned earlier, in the past the US government has released images of dead bodies, for example the dead bodies of Saddam Hussein's sons. The footage of Saddam Hussein's hanging was also broadcast widely around the world, and that didn't result in retaliatory strikes against the West. The idea that an image of a dead bin Laden would push people over the edge is slightly absurd. If Muslim extremists are planning to commit strikes on the West, then I would imagine they were well underway already, and the release of an image isn't going to prompt people into committing murder if they weren't already going to do that. The idea that moderate Muslims would be spurred into violence through the release of these images is equally unlikely. In fact, many people in the moderate Muslim world are demanding further evidence of bin Laden's death because they don't believe the US government's narrative about his supposed killing. So many Muslims are actually demanding the release of the photos, and the idea that this would turn them into suicide bombers is unbelievable. Now, there are reports that the entire attack on bin Laden's compound and his killing was videotaped because the Navy SEALs who carried out the operation had inbuilt video cameras which was recording all of the events that happened. So the obvious solution to the aforementioned problems of whether the images of bin Laden dead should be released or not is to release the video footage, at least the video footage up until the point where bin Laden was shot in the head, and therefore we'll be able to see the Navy SEALs team as they enter the building and as they corner bin Laden, and we can actually see the videotape footage, which is, will be far more convincing than a still photograph of bin Laden. And the footage could even be cut off before the fatal headshot if that's too gruesome to show the public, and we'll still get a good view of bin Laden and be able to confirm whether or not it's him.